Good morning, all. With a quick show of hands, how many of you work in an environment where there are multiple vendors and multiple platforms involved? All right, thank you. That is exactly what we were hoping for, which is a vast majority, if not everybody. And we were going to hope to use the next 45 minutes learning from each other and from our esteemed panel here on what are some of the best practices in succeeding in a multi-vendor, multi-platform environment. I'm Gayatri Shenai. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. And joining me today, on my left, is Amish Patel. He's with Elevance Health, which was formerly known as Anthem. To his left is Mojgan Lefebvre. She is the CTO at Travelers. And then Chris Bedi, who needs no introductions, given we saw him receive the award yesterday. So congratulations again, Chris. And he's the CDIO of ServiceNow. So they're going to join me in this conversation. And the way we'll split this up is I have some prepared questions. I'll try and take a go at it for about 20 minutes. And then I'll open it up to you all for questions from the audience. And if you have none, don't worry, I have a long list. With that, let me start with you, Amish, and we'll go around. But tell us a little bit about the multi-vendor, multi-platform environment you all work in, and a little bit about your work environment. Like, what does your company do?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, and good morning, everybody. What I would say is that we are a large healthcare organization. We have about 100,000 associates serving about 100 million plus people for all their healthcare needs. And from a technology perspective, we are truly trying to simplify and digitize the entire healthcare journey for all our members and patients. So that's a big focus of ours. From a multi-vendor, we are a very heterogeneous environment, like many, many companies. And we have a large ecosystem of partners and vendors that we typically bring them together to create value. So that's just a little bit about the complexity of our organization.
Same question. So Travelers Insurance, we are a property and casualty insurance, so home, auto, business insurance. We're about 40 billion in revenues, 30,000 people. We work through agents and brokers, 15,000 of them operate across the US, Canada, and Europe. Again, large, very heterogeneous. We've been around for 165 years. Everything we do, every decision we make, which is a risk decision, is based on data. So you can imagine that there are many systems, lots of legacy ones, and then of course we're in the process of transforming, have been doing so over the past 5 years, really driving as much digitization, impacting both the customer and employee experience, and of course trying to drive as much productivity as possible while we continue to advance our ability to make decisions about risk.
And I can go next. Chris Bedi, I'm the CDIO at ServiceNow. ServiceNow, for those of you who don't know it, is a workflow platform company based out of the Silicon Valley. We started out doing, I shouldn't call them basic because it's really hard, and this audience would actually know that, workflows around IT operations, IT service management, but then I call it graduating up into workflows that are more important to organizations like claims processing at Travelers, like working with organizations like Elevance in terms of multi-cloud management. So really, if you think about it, workflows that power the enterprises of most of the Fortune 500. And I think the multi-vendor thing is a really interesting topic. Just because we're a tech company doesn't mean we exclusively use our own platform. And I think for us, it's always a tension between trying to standardize as much as possible onto common platforms, but also necessary differentiation, which means a more complicated landscape to drive our business forward. And I think that's a tension we all deal with in this room.
Thank you. With that, maybe I'll jump in with a question, Amish, for you and for you, Mojgan, which is when we were doing this prep call, one of the things that stuck out for me was you deal with a lot of states. It's Blue Cross, Blue Shield, healthcare for different states, and so you deal with different regulations that are specific to each state. And then Mojgan, when you're talking about travelers, it's way more international. You're dealing with similar complexity, but at a country level, multi-country level. So talk to us a little bit about the challenges of already the business challenges, but then in that a multi-vendor, multi-platform, multi-service environment, what are some of the key challenges you see?
Sure. So listen, I want to take a step back and say, why do we have multi-vendor? I think, Chris, you touched a little bit about this. And it's all around, from our perspective, it's all around diversification and amplification, right? So that's the reason we typically invest or we call upon multiple partners to kind of join us. But the complexity is all around, and if I step back in the sense that first, before you engage any partner, you have to get your team aligned in a lot of this. Because if your own team and your own company is not aligned in terms of what you want to do, bringing additional vendor partners and what have you will just add a significant layer of complexity. So that is one thing that we are trying to do very, very hard, is whenever we spawn off any initiatives, we want to make sure that we understand what are the key capabilities we want to achieve. Is the team, the operating team, is that aligned in terms of what we want to do? And then we start engaging partners in terms of scaling and amplification and how we engage with them. So that's some of the ways. But yeah, it's a challenging ecosystem when it comes to the tech landscape.
So you said something around we want to be as common as we can. So we actually say common as possible, unique as necessary. That's kind of our motto. You're very welcome to it. And it's funny because it started in the tech landscape and now our business uses it because again we've got multiple business units, as you said, multiple countries, and we want to make sure that we're leveraging our scale. Otherwise, our scale is not really going to make a difference. But again, it's critical to say, what can be common and should be common and what should stand out. Certainly one of our principles is we're going to build where it's going to make a difference and going to bring us competitive advantage, but we want to buy when and where we can. And of course, there are a slew of providers that provide a set of capabilities. I would say in this world, you want to make sure that, again, where it makes a difference, you kind of go with the best of breed. Where it doesn't, it's okay if it's only 80%. But again, all of that certainly has led to having multiple vendors. And then, of course, having your own existing kind of legacy platforms as well. I'd say in every single one of these implementations, whether you're implementing a package solution or building your own, probably the biggest cost and the biggest complexity comes from integration. So there's the implementation of the package solution, which you can try to stay as close to vanilla and coming out of the box as possible. But it's really the integration with the existing that makes all the difference. And so I'd say, you want to make sure you have a plan around that. You certainly want to make sure that you're aligned to the business outcomes. I mean, first and foremost, as Amish was saying, you want to have a roadmap and certainly making sure that you're staying aligned to a modern architecture that allows that integration to be as standardized as possible, leveraging API platforms, leveraging some of the integration platforms that exist out there.
That's a great point. And maybe, Chris, just to bring you in, as a CDIO who I understand has integrated across acquisitions, what are some of those best practices that you would say is top, something top of mind that people should focus on?
Well, I'm not sure about best practices. I'll say some of our lessons learned over the years. And it started out with just zooming out and saying, okay, what is the North Star here? And as I think about the way work is evolving and platforms are evolving, when I think about individual applications, and we have them for a reason, unique as necessary, right, to steal your term, is we're starting to think about those as more of a collection of APIs, right, and a source of data to field AI models, which then kind of changes the purpose and utility of an application from we're buying an application for maybe its UI or its screens. No, we're actually buying it for its APIs, and we're buying it for its data that can fuel models. Going back to your integration question, then it puts an unfair or more burden on the sophistication of the integration technology. So one of the things we did as an example, in every sprint cycle, it's like it sounds very simple, but it's a really interesting question to ask. how many story points are we dedicating to actually building out robust APIs versus story points dedicated to the next form or widget or whatever the case may be. And equally, how many story points are we developing on, we call them data products, but really they're ML models with an API on top of them. So I think that's one, making sure you're very intentional about building it into your engineering cycles. The second one, code reuse, is easy to say, hard to do. But one of the things we've done is said, let's make the check-in process really hard. And if we make the check-in process hard, it's sort of like it's going to pay dividends down the line. And then the third, it goes back to common platforms, right? If we can standardize on a set of integration technologies, I think one is utopian, right? It's sort of like having one content management system. If anybody has one, please find me at a break. But a set of integration technologies that you're really building a set of skill sets around. So one, engineering intentionality. Two, look at making the check-in hard. And then three, skill sets on fewer things.
You know, Chris, you remind me of, when I was going into the university, and one of my computer science professor always used to say this, right? Amish, a layer of abstraction can solve a lot of issues, and it's so relevant that having those loosely coupled APIs and having those layer of abstraction can really, really benefit you in the long term.
I love them make the check-in hard. So that upfront investment, kind of a longer-term approach to pay off dividends.
Yeah, and it's painful to start with because there's a lot of forces, Mojgan, that are going to push towards code velocity. How many story points per week? So and everything's a balance, and as leaders, that's our job, right? How do you balance these multiple objectives? So how do you achieve velocity while keeping it hard?
Yeah.
And there is I love where you both went, right? There's a little bit of intentionality of being very clear on what you're driving towards, making integrations a part of your core focus, core priority. And then Amish, you talked a little bit about knowing what your strategy is, what you want to work on as you go, bring the vendors and bring the platforms in. We are following the Gen AI talk. So let's connect the dots there, right? Like you're experimenting, if that's the right word to use, with Gen AI. It's still the honeymoon period. It's unclear, what the long-term strategy vision would be. So talk to us a little bit about how do you introduce and/or work with multi-vendors in that environment?
Yeah, and I think Amir hit it on some of his 7 key takeaways. I think one of the takeaways was that, he compared it with digital transformation and with Gen AI, and he's basically highlighting the points that, hey, Gen AI will be 7-8x times more. You'll have to do more investment in change management, and that is so critical. I think that's such a great point that he made, and that's what we are seeing, is that when you're working with a lot of these multi-partner ecosystem, I think clarity, communication, change management, they are really, really have to be forefront, because the tech piece, even though they are challenging, they are still engineering problems you can solve for it. So the tech architecture, the business architecture are something that can be solvable. The people architecture aspect of it, which is what change management and what have you, that's the tough part, and that's what I think is going to get amplified even more with Gen AI, and we as CIOs, CTOs, CDOs will have to be very, very prepared for it.
I think there's
No, please, Mojgan.
there's one element that, frankly, I think is common even between the digital transformation and the Gen AI, and that's the whole end-to-end process, end-to-end workflow. I think in general, as companies, we tend to be siloed, especially when it comes to functions, and so thinking about the fact that like in our world of insurance, we can't really change the operation if our underwriters don't start doing things differently. And so thinking about it end to end, and so making sure that the use cases that you're taking into account aren't really just like, okay, what are you going to do in underwriting? What are you going to do in claim? But it's literally thinking about it from the customer's perspective, from the agent broker's perspective, and really thinking of that value chain. And so starting with that, simplifying that when and where possible, and then automating, as Amir said again, to the extent possible. I think that's going to be critical. The other thing is, I think, it's one thing when you're talking about cloud providers where there's so much maturity, and so you can certainly say, play with fewer vendors. I think of Gen AI as, we don't know who the winners are. So right now, I'm really not ready to say, okay, guys, let's go with this one or two people. I think you still have to experiment and look. GPT-4o came out yesterday. It undermined a whole bunch of stuff that we're building, which won't really be necessary anymore.
On those lines, can you also talk a little bit about how are your frameworks adopting or evolving on how you pick vendors? So what used to be, typically CIOs would say financial viability of a company, or to the risk point earlier, risk and cyber. Now, how have your frameworks evolved?
No, those are great questions. I mean, certainly those aren't things you can throw out of the door. If anything, you kind of add the responsible and ethical practices, obviously, in a very explicit way to that. Having said that, there are a lot of very small players, and while in the past we might have said, you've got to have a certain size or your profitability has to be of a certain amount. I mean, some of that is not even necessarily in play anymore, and several of these companies are private. So I think that element has probably changed from the perspective that, we're willing to work with these smaller players and compromise on some of those fronts.
Yeah, if I can add, what we are seeing is on both ends of the spectrum. So we are seeing a massive consolidation happening in some of these mature products that we have or mature technology assets that we own. And that is a level of concern because you don't have the optionality, and then a lot of these predatory pricing are coming into picture. But then you see some of the cutting edge areas like Gen AI, where you see a lot of incumbents and a lot of folks, a lot of new companies coming on. So you really have to have two different models to kind of manage both of them. And that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing, that in one space, it's consolidating very, very fast. In another space, it's spawning very, very fast. Right. So you have to manage both.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what our belief around as much on common platforms as possible, that's something we see with all of our customers as well. But to your point around differentiation, I think I was at a VC firm about 3-4 weeks ago, and the majority of companies getting funded right now are, I don't mean to diminish them, but they're a UI on top of OpenAI, largely. Mm-hmm. So their differentiation is in the UI, and what they're just getting starting on is funding companies with actually small language models or domain-specific language models, which then they can provide actually unique differentiation versus just putting a UI on top of enterprise ChatGPT, which a lot of them are. So I think this hype cycle of Gen AI with, it's a new thing on top of a new model, because the models are also moving very fast. I think we need to see that settle down a bit. Yep. And wait for the true players to actually evolve. And to your point, Amish, around lock-in, and maybe as a person coming from a tech company, it's a little bit, because I feel like vendor lock-in, it's easy to say don't have it, but I'd be interested because it's hard because it goes against build 3 to 5 year roadmaps. Yeah. And if you're in a place where the switching cost is pretty low, which is very rare in my opinion, then you can get out of vendor lock-in. And if you're in a place where there's parity across multiple players in a unique space, then you can actually mitigate the risk of lock-in. Otherwise, I feel like it's a risk that we're all living with every day, because we are building 3 to 5 year roadmaps, we are training our teams, we are investing in integration, and the switching cost isn't small. Yeah. Which then goes to make sure you know who you're doing business with and what's the DNA of the company, back to we won't name names, predatory pricing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
It's a great segue to talk a little bit more about both teams, but also, how do you think about future-proofing in this kind of an environment where it's still, it's a balance, I get that, but would love to hear two thoughts, right? Like one is, how do you think about future-proofing the investment on the technology side? And then two is, how do you think about the balance between your own, where you deploy your own internal teams versus get consultants or get external help or get vendor help?
I mean, maybe connecting it back a little bit, I'm not sure if this is working or not.
It's
but-
on.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's on.
You know, for me, again, I agree with the points you were making, Chris, in terms of, you know, the difficulty of deciding between, you know, how many vendors and which platforms. And that's one thing that I've kind of grappled with, especially when it came to the world of cloud, because regardless of which platforms we're talking about, it still takes a set of skills. And so the investments you've got to make sure that you've got the right people doing, you know, engineering things the right way is a big part of it. And so the idea of diluting that across multiple different platforms really makes it difficult to make those decisions. So I think at the end of the day, frankly, I don't think it's necessarily one specific set of skills, like technical skills that you need to teach. It's really that those engineering, like making sure your people have the right engineering practices and, you know, that continuous learning mindset and desire to continue to learn, because technology is just changing way too fast for us to be able to say, okay, I'm going to hire, you know, train people on this technology and they're going to be set for the next several years. Making sure you've got the right recruiting mechanisms, that, you know, you're bringing in that pipeline. You know, we've multiplied the number of people that we're recruiting on an annual basis. Now, you know, the question becomes, you know, do we still continue to recruit with computer science, or is that now no longer necessary? And do we start recruiting from liberal arts, which is, you know, something that we've kind of moved away from a little bit. But again, you know, making sure you've got the right training in place, ensuring that you've got the right hiring practices, that you're recruiting for potential, not necessarily just for skills. I mean, these are just some of the things that we've done. We've implemented a lot of kind of online training capabilities and ensuring that we're taking that into account when it comes to performance management, like how much of your time are you actually spending? We've actually encouraged and are mandating that our managers provide time to their team members to get trained, because that's not necessarily something that comes back. And then we dedicate one of our sprints to actually innovation and learning, and making sure that we're ensuring that, again, the leaders stick to that and they don't go for the velocity and the output necessarily, and, you know, prioritize learning. So those are some of the things that we're taking into account.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different point in terms of there are certain tech stacks that it makes sense to provide the layer of abstraction that I talked about earlier, and particularly in cloud. Like, we are getting into multi-cloud environment, and what we have done is we have standardized on our management plane. So whether you consume services from AWS or Azure or from GCP, at least from a developer perspective, it's all orchestrated, it's all automated for you. So we are trying to you know, diversify our bets when it comes to some of these big investments. But I totally agree, it's a very hard problem to solve, and not all technologies are, you know, given that you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree theoretically, but we kind of like all paid the price of that, where, you know, again, whether we name names or don't, that like there were platforms certainly that made that promise.
That's right, yeah.
And, you know, today we found ourselves having to invest to move away from them because they didn't really deliver. But you're right, like theoretically, that's absolutely the right approach.
With that, I'm going to open it up to questions in maybe a couple more minutes. So if you have questions, please do raise your hand and we'll have mics coming to you. Maybe one last question before I do open it up. You talked a little bit about change management and communication becoming really critical as we connect with multi-vendors. Now, in that, you also have your business unit stakeholders, you have your management team, you have your working teams. There's a whole plethora of other stakeholders. So talk to us about innovation on the change management communication side that you've seen work really well in a multi-vendor environment.
So listen, it all begins with trust, right? And when you assemble a group of stakeholders, what we have seen, I've seen and my teams have seen, is that communication, clarity, transparency, these become paramount when you're trying to you know, embark on a large initiative. And these are different stakeholders with different kind of needs. Like my business partners really don't really care where I'm running them, but they want to know what is it going to get them. So the needs that they have are very different than the need that a technology leader or a technology group has. And how do you bridge that together from my perspective is paramount.
I would just add that change management, training, communication, all of those are in an effort to get humans to change behavior.
Yeah.
And one of the things I shamelessly stole from consumer tech, they've changed our behavior. It's how we watch movies, it's how we shop, it's how we get transportation. And the way they did it is through building an absolute kick-ass experience, right? That's the truth. They did it, and I still remember the first time I used Uber, I was like, oh, there's my car. I was so excited to see my car move on the screen. But it's innovations like that. So one of the things, stealing a page out of their book, is if we're investing $10 in training and communication, can we divert 6 or 7, like that degree of a shift, into getting that much better of a user experience, which makes training unnecessary, where it's that intuitive. And consumer, again, has set the bar, right, for tech. So my approach has been a little bit different, which is the way we grew up around training and communication, we have to change our mindset. Because I do believe all of this is an effort to change behavior. The right experience can change behavior in a heartbeat without us even trying.
That's well said. Thank you. All right, question.
So good morning. My name is. Can you hear me?
No.
All right. Well, I'll just. Good morning. My name is Kapil, and I'm a partner at Gravitas. My question is, and I'm going to preface the question by saying that sometimes I've seen at clients that despite having a robust enterprise architecture strategy and really strong procurement teams, the organizations make poor decisions when it comes to selecting vendors or platforms, mostly in the form of shadow IT. So as CIOs, what can we do better to prevent those bad decisions?
And I think there are 2 parts to his question, at least that's how I see it. One is vendor management. How does vendor management really evolve in this world? And then 2 is how can CIOs play a bigger role in controlling shadow IT?
Yeah, I mean, I think governance, again, comes into play. First of all, you've got to partner closely with the procurement organization. I mean, you've got to be aware of what's going on before you can get in front of it. I think shadow IT comes because there's a need for something and it doesn't exist, and so people basically do what they need to do. But ensuring that, again, as demands arise, that there is a path for it to get to the right people who are accountable for making that choice. And so the way we've set it up is in partnership between our procurement, finance, and our technology team. We've got a governance where anything, whether it's a proof of concept or an actual decision in something that needs to be bought, gets brought there. There certainly has to start with a business case. What's the objective? What are the business outcomes you're looking for? Once that gets approved, then it's evaluation of the vendors, of course, which you've got your cyber and compliance reviews, you've got your financial reviews. But again, at the helm of it, you've got to have that business sponsor and then their technology partner, along there, and then ensuring that you stick to that. It's not easy. What we've done is we've also set up category owners. So it's not always the technology people who are making the decisions, but if it's a learning solution, you've got a category owner for learning. If it's procurement, you've got a category owner for whatever function the technology you're picking is going after. And so, that's what we're driving. And again, back to communication, making sure people are aware that this process exists. We've kind of gone through making sure that people are aware of the policy and that that's being communicated. And so hopefully if you do this, then you're driving out the need for shadow IT and driving a more standardized approach to it.
I'm going to piggyback off something Mojgan said, which is shadow IT exists for a reason. It's because somebody needs to drive their business forward, their department forward, and they don't have the tech to do it. And they probably can't do it without the tech. And so I think the first thing is we need to kill that term, shadow IT, because it has such negative implications. Mm-hmm. And your other point was we can't become the no police. Right. So it's governance with empowerment of, I love the idea of category owners. But I also think one of the things that we've been pretty successful with is citizen development. Mm-hmm. It's citizen development not out of control, wild, wild west. We still have control, but they feel like they're in control. If that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. We're watching everything that's happening, but they're still free to innovate and do what they want within some guardrails. And I actually think the opportunity for citizen development or non-IT development is only going to increase with some of these generative AI technologies, because the skill set barrier, and Mojgan, you hit on this in terms of your recruitment philosophy, is only going to get lower. And as that gets lower, the demand is going to get higher. Why can't I just do this myself? And I feel like as CIOs, if we don't get in front of it, right, there is going to be a backlash and a negative perception.
Yes. I'll
Yes,
come to
hello.
you first, and then I'll go here.
Okay, hi. Question over here. Thank you so much for your remarks. I have a question about talent. Oh, Julia Abramovich, I'm a principal with KPMG. So there's been a lot of discussion about talent and the need for the employees to feel safe experimenting and learning these new technologies. There's undoubtedly going to be step change in productivity with these new technologies. What is your guidance and thoughts around the need to be really authentic with our people, around the fact that at least some of those productivity gains are going to need to be passed back to customers, and there might be some job changes as an outcome?
I can start, and I'll be brief, and then others can chime in. I think it comes down to leadership. And we all know every company is going to be AI-driven, AI-first, whatever tagline you want to use. And we have to get people comfortable with this tech. And one of the things we did was we did an AI 101 for the whole company. I know we're a tech company, but still we have non-technical people. AI 101, but then we actually put the impetus on different department heads. And we're not done by any means. This is a work in process to say, what does the AI first HR department look like? AI first marketing, AI first customer support. And then as it relates to that, what are the new tasks that people will have the opportunity to do, because other tasks we're going to relinquish to the machine. Because it's incumbent on us to paint, I think, the path for all of the talent in the organization. Left to their own devices, I think everyone goes to the worst possible scenario, which is I'm gone. And I don't think that's going to be the case at all. So we're trying to get ahead of it, but the impetus is a lot on leadership to get this right, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, well said. One of the key principles, and I also had a town hall. And listen, I think it all starts with transparency and really telling them that, listen, this is a technology that we all need to lean in and learn and grow from it, right? And I think that's critical when you say that to them and actually provide the mechanism and training curriculums so that they can learn and add more value to our customers and to our business people. So I would start with transparency and leadership are two things I would absolutely start with.
Thanks. Yes.
Hello. Oh, good, that's working. Hi, I'm Sean Murphy. I used to work in the office of the CIO of two very large companies, Target, United Health Group. And in both of those environments, we had thousands of developers that were working on all these great things, different vendors and so forth. And then one of the challenges that we found was that in the office of the CIO, we were perched in a position where we can see kind of all these things happening. But for all those people on the front lines working on the technology, it's very difficult to get a good sense of the full arsenal and capabilities of the organization. I'd be curious, what is something distinctive that each of you do in your own cultures to kind of spread ideas, especially in this time of so much change?
Yeah, I'll go first since you mentioned United.
You're going to say how you do it better, right?
Yeah, that's right, from an Elevance perspective. So listen, I think very good question, and I don't think there is a answer or a definitive answer on this. It depends, unfortunately. But a couple of ways that we have kind of accelerated this journey is that one of the things we have done is we have actually deployed a developer workbench. Right, and we, a lot of companies don't do this, but one of the things that we have understood is that, hey, we are seeing a lot of developers getting onboarded very, very quickly in different areas, and they are spending weeks and months just setting up their environment, right? So to your question around that, hey, a lot of these front end, folks, we really truly don't know. It's because of all the one-off customization that they have done. So we have given them standardized tooling to allow them to get onboarded very, very quickly so that they are productive in matter of days and maybe a week and a half, not the months that it takes to get you access and what have you. So I think it's very important that we continue to accelerate that and we continue to give them the tooling that they need. Like some of the code generation tools, we have deployed it internally, and thousands of developers have access to it. So the power and scale at which we are doing this is phenomenal in this particular area. But again, it's not a one and done thing. There are many different areas that there are many opportunities.
I think the concept was around spreading of ideas and developers, and so certainly an unfinished story, but we obviously try to promote code reuse. I actually think Gen AI might be one of the catalysts to get us over the hump, because we also deployed a Gen AI text to code, and one of the things it does is it actually has knowledge of all the previous functions which have been created. So as a developer, I'll take an easy example. You need to create a sort algorithm, and as you're typing your code, it will actually tell you, here's a sort algorithm, do you want to use this one? So we actually think that might be the unlock. We've tried all the other things around training and developer workbenches and getting up to speed, but that spreading of knowledge amongst people is a super hard problem to solve. I'm actually hopeful AI might be the unlock.
With that, I know I promised him one last question, so we'll take his question, and then you'll have the opportunity to catch up with the panel during the lunch break.
Thank you all for very insightful discussions. My name is Raymond Corey. I'm a partner with Arthur D. Little, the oldest management consulting firm that started from MIT. Question, given the governance models of your respective firms, how much leverage or power or steer do you have with the vendors and partners that you work with? Are there opportunities for co-innovation, co-creation? How do you handle that? And in the context of startups, is there a sort of a corp-ups model that you follow where startups can work with you to scale up and become relevant, and then you eventually potentially acquire them? Some thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly start. So, I do think choosing your partners and who you want to work with is absolutely critical. Now, having said that, certainly companies and vendors go through evolutions, and there are mergers and acquisitions that happen, and so that can change. But I do think, again, selection of the right vendors, making sure you've got access to the right people, you've got the executive sponsors that you can escalate as necessary. I mean, if you've got all of those, it can go a long way. Also ensuring that you've got scale, because again, if you're spreading your spend across a large number of vendors, then without the scale, probably your negotiating power goes down as well. So yeah, we're lucky enough that we're large enough that we've got the ability to do that. We've also been very intentional in terms of having a select group of strategic vendors, whether it comes to kind of software vendors or the services providers. And so again, being intentional in going about that, setting up that strategy, I think is key. In terms of startups, absolutely. We definitely work with startups, and when we see capabilities that are going to make a difference to our business model, we tend to invest. We either invest partially, and it has actually happened that we've also ended up acquiring some of those. Now, those are largely in our line of business usually. So when it comes to the insurance value chain, as opposed to necessarily software companies, although frankly, I would say in today's world, everybody's becoming a technology company. So that's probably going to start to change. That's a little bit of the approach that we take.
Yeah, I'll just add that very similar approach. We are actually, the way we do it is if we see a unique value proposition, we tend to make an investment. And it's typically a confidential investment that I don't think we announce it in the public. But as that product matures, we definitely try to acquire them and integrate them into our mainstream products. But very similar concept.
Maybe I'll give one example because this is public, so it's okay. So Carpe Data, which is a solution that really allows you to get information on social media of consumers. And that's a way that, let's say in the world of insurance, knowing what's going on and the activities that people have. So if somebody's actually making a claim, but then they're on social media and they're skiing or they're up on their roof and doing something. I mean, that's been actually pretty critical. And so that's one of the companies that we've invested in. And then, of course, as we've invested in them, other of our competitors and peers have done so. But then, if you're kind of an early investor, you certainly can have an advantage of at least, 12 to 24 months.
Awesome. Thank you for that. When we are having a great conversation, we can keep going on. We are at time. So maybe I'll steal one last question, which I'm stealing from the previous panel discussion, which was in 30 seconds or less, what's the one advice you'd want this audience to walk away with from this discussion? And Chris, if you want to kick it off.
Wow. Just be bold. Like I said last night, tech is so important to every company in every industry, and Mojgan, you hit on it. Every company is becoming a tech company. You all are in charge of it. Just be bold and drive. Your company needs it.
From a multi-vendor perspective, I'd say at the end of the day, it's about relationships and partnerships. So again, build those relationships and partnerships, and the vendor management will become easier. It's a partner management at that point.
Yeah, I'm glad you said relationship, because I was going to hit on that. A relationship-based approach, rooted in a collaborative approach, but with constant communication and transparency. I think that's where the success gets unlocked.
Awesome. Well, I take away 3 words: bold, partner, not vendor, and then collaboration and innovation. So thank you. With that, please put your hands together for this amazing panel.